Where most of you are getting caught is that these gender scripts, these rules, these stories, these instructions are running like an OS in the background that you don't even know is running. You're not even aware of it. All right. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the Sex After Kids podcast. If you have ever had an argument that starts with the dishes and somehow ends with no sex for 3 weeks, this is probably why. There's this invisible force at play in so many relationships, and it's this kind of silent weight that causes resentment, fuels arguments, and creates a distance between you and your partner that can feel impossible to cross. Of course, we are talking about the mental load, the invisible load, chores and childcare, whatever you want to think of it as. But it often explains why resentment and frustration are high and why sex and connection are low, especially through the early kids' years or any kids' years and through midlife parenting and the squeeze when we're also dealing with aging parents. If you have ever wished that your partner would just get it when it comes to all that you are carrying, or if you have banged your head against the wall because you feel like you've done the work and your intimate life still hasn't changed, then you are in the right place. Welcome to Mental Load 101. By the end of this episode, I am hoping that you will see the real reason that you have been fighting and feeling so disconnected. And I promise it's not what you think. And this is so important because we're going to spend the next 4 episodes actually on this topic in our new sort of like mini series format. So over the next 4 episodes, we're going to break down what the mental load is, why it's impacting your sex life specifically, because that's what we talk about here. And most importantly, how to fix it, as well as sharing some examples of how my husband and I have used our awareness of this and some of these tools to really shift the dynamics in our relationships. So make sure that you hit follow or subscribe so you don't miss a thing, and let's dive in. Okay, so first off, I just want to acknowledge that right now there are 2 people listening to this episode, and you are both living in very different realities, very different universes, okay? So the first person I kind of want to talk to is often the moms. Mental load work is and can be very gendered. But I do want to note that it's not non-existent in same-sex relationships. However, it does exist along a very gendered line because of what we're going to talk about here in a minute. So to the person who feels like they are doing all the things, doing all the mental load, holding it all together, you feel this huge resentment and frustration building, but often you can't always name why. You know, I think there's a lot more literacy around mental load, and for some of us, it's still a new thing. But for this person, it often feels like every decision is on their shoulders. So every appointment, every grocery list, every decision in the household. And if you're honest, sometimes you feel like your partner's just another kid or like a person that you manage in your house, that you are responsible for. So every time you see laundry on the floor instead of the basket, every time you plan thoughtful, nutritious meals and your partner just dumps chicken strips on the dinner table again, you don't trust them to like get things done, or at least get them done right? And you don't often feel like you have a partner. You don't feel like you have someone who's got your back. You don't feel like anyone is holding you or taking care of you. You are taking care of everything for everyone. You are the project manager in the house. And that is a frustrating place to be. Now, we also have the other partner on the other side of this who might not be understanding why their partner is so angry and so tired and so overstimulated and so overtouched. They might not understand why you don't want to be intimate with them. Maybe you've heard about the mental load and you feel like you are carrying your fair share and you have been having conversations. Or maybe you're actually killing yourself to do all the right things, but nothing seems to change because if you take on a job, you almost never seem to get it right. And likely you don't feel like everything that you do is seen or appreciated either. So you can often feel like all you hear is criticism and resentment, and it can also feel like the goalpost is always moving. Like, oh, if I just do this, then we'll have more connection. Oh, but now I have to do this to get more connection. And now I have to do this to earn more connection. And can get us in this place of like feeling like we have to earn affection from our partner. You can see that your partner's depleted. You can see that they're doing too much, but you honestly do not know how to help, because inviting them to just relax or take the night off is definitely not working. And if any of that sounds familiar, it's not just you, right? This is one of the most common and one of the most destructive cycles that we get into as couples in the modern era. So how do we fix it? Well, first we have to identify the problem correctly. So you've probably told yourselves a bunch of stories about what's wrong, that it's just what life with kids is like, that you're just tired, that if you just had more time or more money, things would be better. Maybe you secretly think if your partner could just relax, everything would be fine. Or maybe you think if your partner would just step it up and fold the towels the way you want them to be folded and use some common sense, then you wouldn't be in this mess, right? And what I want to offer to you is that the problem isn't your partner fully, and it's not you fully either, right? The real enemy is an invisible one, which is that you have stopped operating like a team and you have accidentally fallen prey to old and outdated gender scripts that are running your relationship without permission. And so, well, we're going to talk about what gender scripts are and what they mean. But I just want to say that, like, it doesn't matter how we decide to split the jobs. It doesn't matter if you want to do the trad wife thing. What matters is that you've consciously discussed who's taking on what jobs and that you're both okay with the agreement. Where most of you are getting caught is that these gender scripts, these rules, these stories, these instructions are running like an OS in the background that you don't even know is running. You're not even aware of it. So gender scripts are these ideas created by society about how men and women should act. And that's why this becomes a gendered conversation, right? They tell us that women are nurturing homemakers who do the pink jobs like laundry, groceries, cleaning, the daily tasks that never ever end. And gender scripts tell us that men are on the blue jobs, right? So making money, repairing things, yard maintenance, maybe even discipline for the kids. These are secret, hidden codes that we learned from our parents and from our culture. And even if you had a super equal relationship before kids, a really funny thing happens when babies arrive, which is that we often subconsciously revert right back to these gender scripts without even knowing it. Especially if you have the luxury, like we do in Canada and many other countries in the world, of a longer maternity leave where you have women or birthing partners staying home for a year or more, being the primary parent, being on a lot of these pink jobs while the other partner's out earning money. We just default to this thing. And so what used to be equal, where we both paid bills and we both did groceries and we both whatever, now becomes very lopsided very quickly. And sometimes we don't even know what fucking happened. So we have these invisible scripts, right? They're running in the background, but there's another kind of layer to this that's happening inside our bodies, because these scripts don't just dictate who does what. They dictate the stress that we carry and the nervous system state that we're in as a result. And what I mean by that is more so that they dictate like the expectations. The standards are very high for women in particular to do it all, to do it perfectly, and to do it all while maintaining a seamless and perfectly manicured and presented home. And what that means is we stress more about those things because the expectation on us is higher. Whereas men, the expectation around them taking care of their kids is like, oh, like of course you're going to come home to a super messy house after dad has watched the kids for a day because he's been actively playing with them. And there was no expectation for him to also cook a meal and also do the things. And I don't mean that within our relationship. I mean as a societal expectation. So in episode 48, Sex or Stress, I go a little bit more deeply into stress responses, right? But in short, when we're outside of this window of tolerance in the middle for stress, we go one of two ways. We can go into hyper arousal, where our brain holds on to control, criticism, perfectionism. Sound familiar? Or we can go into hypo arousal, where our body goes into shutdown, shame spiral, and freeze. Can you see where I'm going with this, right? Often women, not always, will default to the hyperactive state. So our nervous system hijacks us and we double down on control. This is where the you don't do it right, so I will, never mind mindset comes from. On the other side, many men will default to the hypoactive shutdown, feeling useless in the face of criticism. So what I'm trying to get at here is that the dynamic here of one person who's like doing it all, carrying the load, and then like critical and frustrated and resentful as a result, with the partner who's under functioning, but also feeling a lot of shame and helplessness around that, is one part learned cultural teachings, but it's one part also how we naturally respond to stress. And so some of us who are doing it all and carrying all the load go into freeze because we're overwhelmed. But a lot of us go into that hyperactive state. And so we want to be careful because there's two pieces at play here. There can be a piece where absolutely genuinely one person is doing way more than the other. And we're going to talk about how to rebalance that and have those conversations. And that's very often true or still partially true. Because oftentimes when we're working on it, we still haven't quite got there. And then also we can be in the dynamic where actually things are quite fairly shared, because the truth is there's actually more jobs than both of you can do. And the last episode I did about mental load was that like fixing it won't totally help your sex life. And I still stand by that. And there are elements here that do need to be repaired, but that is things can be fairly equal. But then if your stress response is to get critical and judgy when you're stressed, then actually what we're looking at is how is everyone dealing with stress, not how is everything distributed in the home. So there's two pieces to this. How are we sharing the jobs, and how do each of us respond to stress, and how are we using that as information in our relationship? Okay, so with all of that in context, the scripts, the stress responses, let's put a formal name to this beast. What is the mental load officially? So according to UCLA Health, the mental load refers to the behind the scenes cognitive, so mental and emotional work needed to maintain a household. It is invisible, it is constant, it is multifaceted. So it's not just packing the lunches, it's the invisible, unseen labor of planning something nutritious, remembering who hates fruit cups this week now, and knowing who's on a field trip and needs a cold lunch. Another example would be it's not just washing the laundry and folding the laundry. It is remembering that swimming is Saturday and that the swim gear is probably rotting in the entryway. And it's remembering that so-and-so is absolutely out of socks, and other kid, you've noticed the last 3 times that his pants were way too short and you probably need to buy some, right? You can also think of this as like project management. So for those of you who work in project management or who make projects happen in your job, there's doing the things, but then there's the person who's thinking about the whole, who's thinking about all the tasks that need to be done and all the people those have been assigned to and all the loose ends. It's a lot of invisible, behind the scenes mental work. And so the reason that these gender scripts create such an imbalance is because the invisible thinking that goes into pink jobs is often centered around caregiving, anticipating the needs of others, and really this project management type stuff. So in order to be good at pink jobs, I need to be 10 steps ahead of everyone in my household at all times. I need to remember that Timmy doesn't like fruit cups anymore, and Mira really hated that orange that I gave her last week, so I should probably pack something else for her. Blue jobs, on the other hand, like traditional blue jobs, are very distinct, open and close, do one time, whereas pink jobs are like every fucking day forever. And there's not often a lot of mental load involved in mowing the lawn. You just choose a time to do it and then do it. That being said, they're still making sure the mower works and getting it out of the garage for the first time of the season and all that kind of stuff. But what happens is a lot of blue jobs are like one-time seasonal things. So like bring the car in twice a year to get the tires changed or mow the lawn once a week. They're not daily and never done. You know, if you mow the lawn, it's mowed at least for a week. The minute I do the dishes and I do a sweep of the house to see what else is left, the counter looks like I have not done the dishes. There's this Sisyphusian, never ending weight that comes from these like daily grind jobs, which is what Eve Rodsky from Fair Play Life calls them. In short, all of this leads to a me versus you dynamic. We end up calculating who's doing more because we are operating off of silent expectations. And most importantly, we have stopped feeling like a team. So I want you to pause and just think, like, when you had the babies, did you have overt conversations about who would grocery shop and who would do laundry and who would do dishes and who would do pickups? Or did you just assume so-and-so would be on certain things and so would be on others? Most of us assumed and did not have an overt conversation. And the conflict, again, is not about how many jobs are on each person's list. It's about whether we overtly had a conversation about that or whether it just happened. And it's the assumption part that hurts and frustrates the overdoing partner the most. So what does this do to our sex life? Well, if I am literally the only one holding all the balls, my brain doesn't have the nervous system space to relax enough for sex. And when my partner is a fully functioning adult at work, but comes home and can't even find the scissors in the drawer that they have been in for the last 10 years, you bet your butt I am resentful. And when I'm in caregiver mode all the time, caregiving you, caregiving the kids, when I'm putting everyone else's needs above my own all the time, because I've been trained and taught that I'm supposed to be 10 steps ahead of everyone's needs all the time, guess what? I stop remembering and knowing what my own needs are. I stop giving myself permission to have needs. And sex just becomes another thing I do for you because I forget that it can have any benefit to me. So I hope that's coming through pretty clear here. So what's the glimmer of hope here? Because of course there's plenty, which is that it doesn't have to be this way, right? What if you could stop fighting against each other and start working together to rewrite those scripts in a way that works for your relationship? What if you had an explicit and overt way to decide how you want to run your life together as a team? Because side note, when you run your life together as a team, you feel like a team. You feel like you both have each other's back. You feel supported, and that's what matters. A fascinating study, I heard it years ago on the radio, so of course I don't have the link to it, was talking about how more conservative, more traditional, more whatever word you want to say, couples were happier because even though they had a more traditional blue job, pink job split, it was that they both had the expectation that that should be the split. And it was either overtly discussed or very clear that both of them expected this to be this way. More liberal couples ended up in more relationship dissatisfaction because they both knew they didn't want the traditional blue job, pink job split, but they had not discussed an alternative. So they just fall into the traditional norm without wanting to be in the traditional norm. And without any alternative to create, they just end up in this frustration and resentment. So like I always say, overt conversation about these things, these mindsets, these expectations is what sets us free. So now that you can see it, I hope you can't unsee it. You can see the invisible system, these gender scripts that's been causing so much of the conflict. It's not that it's not him and it's not you. It's both of you. And it's this cycle that you're both stuck in. So if you're listening to this and thinking, yes, this is us, how do we get out? That is what I am here for. If you aren't sure how to even start this conversation, then you can book a free spark session with me. And in 30 minutes, we'll figure out exactly how this is playing out in your relationship and map out the first steps to get you out of the resentment cycle so you can start feeling the love again. The link is in the show notes. Because knowing the problem is one thing, getting out of it is another. So the big question is, how do you actually start this conversation without turning it into the same old fight? And if you've been thinking about this, how do you know if you're really doing your fair share or just feel like you are? And how do you know when you've got to let go of some control and some expectations to create harmony? That's exactly what I want to start to break down in the next episode. So, subscribe, follow, get ready, because your relationship is about to change for the better. And I will see you then.